Okay. Well, hello everyone. Thank you for sticking around until the final talks for VN conference. My talk today is on character customization, if it's right for your game, what kinds of customization you can include, and how to add it. So who am I? I am Shauna, or also go by Feniks or Fen Online, which is a play on the word phoenix, hence my little animated phoenix bird. I've been working in RenPy since 2018 and coding for even longer than that. Some of you will know me best as the programmer for GB Patch, where I've worked on the Our Life games for the past 4 years, but I like to dabble in all sorts of projects, including game jams. I also have a website where I post tutorials to help people learn how to code in RenPy, and I put out tools for visual novels on my itch.io, some of which will be helpful for today's topic. To start, what is character customization? Character customization, as I'll be discussing in this talk, involves allowing the player to customize aspects about the main point of view character in the game. This can include customizing their appearance, pronouns, starting stats, backgrounds, goals, and more. The customization can have lasting effects throughout the game or only impact the initial setup. We'll be going over design decisions for customization and even look at some implementation details in RenPy. To start, let's look at some of the pros and cons for character customization so you can decide whether it's right for your story. First, replayability. Character customization can vastly improve replayability. Adding variations according to the aspects the player customized, whether that be their background, personality, gender, or appearance, provides an incentive to return to the same story to explore the lore, characters, narrative, and more. Character customization can also provide players with an avenue to express themselves, especially if they like to imagine themselves as part of the story. Allowing players to create a character who resembles them or who acts like they would can be very meaningful, especially when mainstream representation can be a rarity. Have you ever watched someone play a game and thought, I wouldn't have made that choice. I wouldn't have said that. I like the first hairstyle better than the one that they picked. This can be a major motivator for a player to want to play a game themselves after learning about it. Character customization can be a primary source of this appeal. Customizable main characters are also an excellent avenue for audience engagement. Since facts about the character are not set in stone, players are free to invent additional details to fill in the gaps. Many players will create their own original characters to roleplay as in the story and will create fanworks featuring them. More fanworks about your game expands its reach and can bring more people in to check it out, especially due to the previous point about customization offering a unique experience for each player. Finally, including a customizable main character can open up your game to new audiences. Players often want to play games with main characters similar to themselves. Customization means that a much wider range of people can do so. However, there are also drawbacks to including character customization. For one, it's extra work no matter how you slice it. It's work to include UI screens and choice menus for choosing pronouns, personality traits, appearances, and other information. And it's work to write additional script variations to take customization choices into account. If you're including voiceover with a player who has custom traits, it could require multiple takes on similar lines to account for different pronouns, backgrounds, appearances, and more. If the main character's appearance is customizable, it'll involve more assets, or at minimum, more involved asset creation than if they had a set appearance. Or you might make other sacrifices, such as minimizing the main character's appearance in CG art. We'll go over these drawbacks and ways that you can mitigate them later on, but the second major reason to not include character customization is that it just isn't for all stories. Sometimes your story has more of an ensemble cast, or you have a very plot essential backstory for the main character. If that's the case for your story, character customization might not be right for you. So I've been talking about character customization and you've decided that you're sold on the idea. How do you make the process easier on yourself? Let's look at a few key areas that you might offer customization, how you can add them, and ways of mitigating any downsides. First, we'll start with pronouns. Pronouns are one of the simplest ways to add character customization to a game without adding a ton of work for yourself. First and foremost, use variables. Please do not include a bunch of conditional statements like if pronouns equals she, her, etc. In many engines, this will mean that the line counts as a different one when skipping only unseen text, so players will be halted all over the place when replaying if they choose different pronouns, which is a poor experience. Variables will keep your script readable and make your repeat players happy. These next tips will focus primarily on English pronouns and conjugations, but the idea can be applied to other languages as well. I highly suggest that you set up the variables to be named they, them, their, theirs, themselves, since unlike he, him, and she, her, all they, them pronouns have unique forms. This also results in very readable code, since for the most part, it simply reads like a regular sentence. You will also need to set up verbs for variables, since pronouns like they, them will conjugate differently from most other pronouns. I suggest variables for is, are, has, have, was, were, and then a special s and es variable, which will take care of the majority of regular verb conjugations. This can be extended to other languages. For example, you may declare variables for changing adjectives and verbs into their feminine forms in French. In some engines, there will be a way to directly evaluate a value in dialogue at the time that it's shown, rather than needing to declare a variable with a set value beforehand. In RunPy, we can use the class's special string method to achieve this. Without this, you would need to update perhaps dozens of variables when the player changes their pronouns, but with this, pronouns and related terms become a special kind of constant. It gets evaluated at runtime instead of when it's declared, and in this example, it returns the right word based on one variable called pronouns. The on-screen example accounts for 3 different pronoun sets. You might notice that this logic is very similar to the earlier conditions that I mentioned were bad. The difference is when the logic happens. In a string method, it happens right when the value is shown in dialogue and not when you declare it. This means you can easily update the player's pronouns by switching one variable, and all associated words and terms and verbs will simply work. You can even let the player update their pronouns in the middle of the game or randomize which pronouns are used on every line, which allows for enormous flexibility on the player's side with 0 additional effort on your end. You can use this approach for words you might want to change based on the player's pronouns also, with very few changes. This will allow you to declare honorifics, adjectives, terms of endearment, and more, which are based on the player's pronouns. Where possible, consider also allowing the player to choose terms for themselves independently of which pronouns they choose. You can extend the class approach to facilitate this. I recommend giving each term an ID and storing the player's preferences in a dictionary with the ID as a key. You can then use the class's string method to search for the correct word in the dictionary with the default term as a fallback. If this all sounds confusing, you are in luck. I did the heavy lifting for RunPy users, and I made all of this backend stuff already, which you can find for free on my itch.io. It includes the approach described here, with additional flexibility to allow players to enter their own pronouns and input custom terms. Once the backend is all set up, writing dialogue for a player whose pronouns and terms change every line looks identical to a player who only uses one set of pronouns. Now, as with any feature, there are some potential pitfalls with allowing the player to choose their pronouns and terms. One of these is voice acting. If you're including full voice acting in your game, at some point you are going to want to refer to the character in third person without recording dozens of variations. There are some solutions to this. If you allow the player to change the main character's name, consider keeping a consistent surname or a nickname that other characters can use to refer to them aloud. You can also use their job position or a position of power to refer to them, or use relationship-based terms for characters who are close to the main character. Some languages may also have natural-sounding ways around this, such as the plethora of Japanese terms for referring to people older than you or in a position of authority. Or, if your game isn't set on Earth, consider inventing gender-neutral ways of referring to the main character. If your narration is unvoiced, you can clarify the topic of conversation in a line of narration where you can substitute in variables rather than in voice dialogue. You might also assign other characters the point of view so their internal thoughts don't need to be voiced. If you absolutely must use pronouns to refer to the player, I suggest just recording the line once using they, them. Other than that, using variables in unvoiced dialogue is trivial. Create enough variables to write your script comfortably, maybe even using my tool, and you should be fine. Next, you can also offer character customization in the form of appearance. Allowing the player to change the appearance of the main character can take several forms, so we'll go over a couple of common variants. First off is text-only appearance customization. The main character has no set appearance, and they are never shown in-game. If the game has CGs, they are focused around other characters. On the upside, this approach doesn't require any additional art assets, and it allows for complete player freedom in deciding what the main character looks like. On the downside, the main character can't be shown interacting with other characters in CG art. This is most notable for games which involve romance, where interacting with the love interest is a key part of CG art. Next, a customizable character might only have some small part of them shown in-game. This is most often the main character's hands, but it's sometimes the back of their head, over their shoulder, an extreme close-up of their eyes, etc. Usually the game is still assumed to be from first-person perspective. This approach allows for some limited interaction between the main character and other characters, but it still leaves most of the details of their appearance up to the player's imagination. Depending on what part of the main character you choose to show, you may need additional art assets to reflect the appearance the player has chosen for the main character, such as color variations or different body types. Some clever approaches to this kind of customization involve arranging for conditions which put sensible limits on the player's appearance. For example, you may make your main character a knight, in which case, whenever they are shown, you can show them in a suit of armor. You might show the main character's hand cupping a love interest's face while wearing gloves because they are outside during the winter to avoid needing skin color or hand size variation. Use harsh lighting or framing to avoid showing too much detail. Write your story so the main character is wearing a specific outfit or a hat so their silhouette is distinct, but leaves the details up to the player. Consider also splitting up CG's comic book style with close-ups on some key areas, like hands, to show interaction, but keep the main focus of the art on the other characters. Third, the main character may have one or more preset appearances. If there is more than one preset appearance, it is often tied to choosing a gender. I suggest not tying appearance to gender or pronouns, like you see for Royal Order in the top right. Divorcing these associations adds a trivial amount of work. Perhaps you need 3 variables to track appearance, gender, and pronouns separately, and it gives the player more ways to customize their appearance. Of the upsides, this approach allows for the most interaction between the main character and other characters since they have a fully predetermined appearance which can be shown in-game as a sprite or in CGs. Offering some color or body type options still allows for a level of player control over the main character's appearance. However, this approach requires more assets than if you would like to take advantage of showing the main character in-game, as you'll need to account for all of the customization options. It also places several restrictions on the main character's appearance, resulting in something more akin to variance on the same character, rather than granting each player the ability to create a unique character. One way to mitigate the amount of work this requires is through colorizing images in-engine. If your engine of choice supports shaders, such as RenPy or Unity, you can apply them to the same asset to recolor it in several different varieties. For RenPy users, I have created a shader and accompanying tool to customize the look of recolored images, which is also available for free on my itch.io. Colorizing images in-engine will involve more planning beforehand to set up your base image properly, but the results can very closely match hand-colored assets. Finally, we have the upper echelons of appearance customization, which usually involves mixing and matching assets such as hair, clothing, and body types, as well as choosing colors for many options. These sorts of characters are almost always omitted from CG art due to the work that would be required to account for all of the variations, though they may be shown in-game as profile pictures, side sprites, or even in-game sprites. This approach can allow for an enormous amount of player expression and control over the main character, and the creation process can often be enjoyable in its own right. For players who are less artistically oriented, screenshotting the character they created to share on social media is simpler than drawing a character from scratch and can help bring traffic to your game. However, as you might expect, this approach also requires some of the most art assets and work to implement. It also often leads to trade-offs in other art areas, specifically CGs. Often this kind of approach falls back on techniques mentioned earlier, where the customizable main character is omitted from CGs or only a small part of them is shown. If you'd like to use this approach, there are some ways you can make it easier on yourself. Many of these techniques are similar to what Sheena talked about earlier today for asset reduction, so be sure to go through that talk for more ideas if you missed it. As mentioned earlier, you can colorize images in Engine to reduce the number of handmade color variations that you need. You can also adopt a simplified art style for either the main character or potentially the whole game. Many art styles, especially exaggerated and cartoonish ones or pixel art, can simplify several distinct facial features and body types into one stylized version. You might also choose an art style with fewer colors, such as black and white comic style, or a restricted palette to emulate an older game system. If you're showing the custom character in-game alongside other character art, consider placing some restrictions on what can be customized, such as shoulder width, clothing, or only allowing some facial features, such as the nose and eye shape, to be customized so that you can reserve the eyebrows and lips for expressions. Remember also that you can play in your game around this limitation. Maybe your highly customizable character is in a sci-fi setting with mech suits, or they transform into a werewolf with a set appearance that you can include in key art, or they have a special head-to-toe spy outfit for their job. So how do you actually include customizable appearances in your game? In RenPy, you should make use of what are called dynamic images. These are image paths which include a variable. Like with variable substitution in dialog, the variable's value is substituted in to find the final image. You can then create buttons on the customization screen to change this variable to values corresponding to the file names. The layered image declared on screen right now can be shown with a regular show MC as with other characters, and if you set up your file names properly, it will pick out the right files. If you're using shaders to colorize your images, for example, if you're using my Better Colorize shader, then you can use dynamic displayables instead. This works on a similar principle where you have a variable with color names, but instead of corresponding to file paths, they'll correspond to a dictionary key to look up the colorize information. For my tool, I format them into an object that I call an RGB colorize object. Once you've got that set up, such as in the example, changing the variable skin color to another value will automatically change it within the MC layered image. As with the previous method, you can show the layered image normally with a simple show MC command, and it will appear with the color information you set up. Finally, another avenue of character customization is allowing the player to customize the main character's background and/or personality. Customizing the background may be as minor as deciding the reason why the main character is attending a magical academy, or as major as choosing between multiple different backstories that will affect how the main character is treated within the game narrative and what choices are available to them. To keep background customization from involving too much extra work, carefully consider where you will begin the story. If the player has the option to choose a background as a farmer or as a blacksmith, don't start the story too early in their life. This means you could need entirely different introductions on the farm and in the forge. Start your story where these backgrounds would converge, such as on the day a dragon razed the village and they had to pick up a sword to fight. You can keep players feeling like their choice of background matters by including occasional unique dialogue options or choices which reference their background. Perhaps the blacksmith has additional dialogue when discussing weapons, but the farmer knows more about which wild plants are safe to eat while camping. For a customizable personality, be sure to consider personality traits which will still get the main character where they need to be by the end of the story. A reluctant hero is just as much of a hero as an enthusiastic one, so long as there are enough motivators to get both to the finish line. Even if the main character needs to make a certain decision for the story to work, you can still provide players with differing reasons why they made that decision. Perhaps they join a group of mercenaries out of a desire for safety in numbers, or maybe they join because they want to prove their strength in battle. In most cases, selectable backgrounds and customizable personalities can be done entirely through regular variables. You can add conditions in dialogue or in choices to check for the player's background, and in the example on the right, only a player who chose a background as a blacksmith has the option to get a cheaper price on the sword. If you're watching this talk on YouTube later, be sure to watch Alaric's just before mine for more on choice design. Besides coding in these customization systems themselves, you will also need to consider how to present the customization to players in-game. For pronouns, you should set up common pronouns like she, her, he, him, and they, them for players to simply select. If you allow for custom pronouns, include example sentences with the word substituted in so people can see how it will be used, since most people will not know the grammatical terms for it. Importantly, do not start the sentence with the target word because this will often lead players to incorrectly capitalize it. Typically, you should respect the player's capitalization for these words rather than forcing it to lowercase, since, for example, some players may enter their name to be used instead of pronouns. Don't forget to let players choose which conjugation is used for verbs as well, which you can see in the bottom of the screenshot with the title, Which Sounds More Natural. For advanced customization options, such as custom terms, you should aim for a multi-tiered approach to common use cases. For example, a common use case is a player who would like to use he, him pronouns and have all masculine terms like Mr., son, boy, and brother. To make this simpler for this player, when he selects he, him pronouns without diving into the extra options for custom or multiple pronouns, we simply set the default for all of the terms to be masculine as well, so this player doesn't have to go into the advanced options or change any of the setup for this page. The next tier is for players who want some pronoun customization and have general preferences for which terms are used. For example, there might be a player who uses she, her, and they, them, but only wants characters to use neutral terms like child and sibling. For these players, there's a fast option to choose only neutral-leaning terms. Finally, for players who want the maximum amount of control over their experience, there are the advanced options. Even here, there are shortcuts to mass set many terms to one of the three predefined types. Many players don't need to see or use these options, but for players who want the most control over how the script refers to them, this screen allows them to do so. The same principle can be applied to appearance options. Even if you're using a shader to colorize images, be sure to provide some preset colors the player can mix and match without bringing up a complicated color picker. This will allow players who simply want to pick a few harmonious colors to advance through your customization screens faster to get to the story, but it still offers advanced freedom for those who seek it out. Lastly, wherever possible, spread out customization options into the later parts of the script. If the player's background doesn't come up until 3 scenes into the story, especially if you have a lot of other customization options, consider allowing them to choose their background at that point in the story. Allow the player's personality to be shaped through choices instead of at the start. This becomes more important the more options you have to avoid delaying the player too long before they even know what the experience will be like. There are so many ways to add character customization to your game that don't have to be giant time and energy sinks while still offering a ton of benefits. I hope this presentation has given you ideas on where to start. I'm happy to answer questions on customization aspects we weren't able to cover in this talk as well, either now or in the chat afterwards.
All right. While people get their questions in, I was not expecting code drops.
I feel like I'm known too much for coding to not include code drops, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not complaining. I was just not expecting. I was like, all right, this is the narrative character block of text, and then suddenly blocks of code start flying in, which is totally awesome. Everyone was amazing, loved them. All right, anyone questions? Watching all the love in chat.
My brief comment, I also love the code talk because one of the things that has stopped me from doing this in my games is thinking, oh, that's so much work. So thank you for all your resources.
Yeah, I honestly, character customization is something that's like really important to me. I mean, I think you can probably see that from all of my work on the iLife games. I just think that people, yeah, look at it and go, oh no, I'd never be able to code that. But things like pronouns are really easy to code. You know, like there's very few drawbacks to it if you've got a good system going. So yeah, I wanted to make sure some of that was available.
All right, we got some questions here. So do you create your shaders entirely in script, or do you use a shader graph system?
Fully in RunPy. I am doing it just straight off the cuff, I guess. Taught myself shaders through kind of brute force, so they are fully RunPy compatible. I have not used any shader graphs.
Just the hitting it with the math hammer.
Yep, it is a lot of math.
All right. Is there accessibility or character customization features you wish you could implement but haven't yet?
That was a good point. Some things we have included for accessibility, for example, for color palettes, when you mouse over, there's like a colorblind accessibility option so that when you mouse over the colors, you can see names of them because we do use those names in script. And for some people, especially any kind of like color blindness, you might want to use gold because it's one of the main character's favorite colors. But you don't know which color is gold. And so being able to see the name of it can be very helpful for people. Other accessibility options, I think it is perhaps slightly more difficult to include like useful self-voicing for some like variations of like your script and such. But overall, RunPy does have a lot of very useful like alt text features that you can also make use of for all of your variables and such.
All right. And continuing on, is there a feature you wish you saw in games more often?
I just want, honestly, more pronoun options. I specifically really want to see randomization per line. That is something I included in the pronoun tool that I put up here. It is so trivial. There is a callback in RunPy that just runs every line, and you can just put a thing in that says pick a random one out of their pronouns, and it just works. Like it's if you're writing your pronouns properly, you can just switch them on the fly, and it's great.
Cool. Someone's asking, does the level of script customization ever hurt localization, or are there tips that you have to help with translation efforts?
It for sure does if you have a very long script. I think generally, if your script is a reasonable length, though, just in the sense that, for example, when I went over declaring variables for like French and other languages, whoever's localizing it is going to need to figure out which variables they need. And there may be some script difficulties depending on the language, especially for neutral terms, which ones they can use. But overall, like again, variables are quite cheap. And so you can just declare new ones for different languages.
All right. And someone's asking for honorifics like Mr., Ms., and so on. Is that a variable that contains a space? Because sometimes people prefer having that there or just wanting the name without the title.
You can for sure include a space. You could make a variable that's very specifically like based on a condition that's like if they input a term for their like honorific, include a space here. If they don't do that. I have, and I'll probably release this at a tool at some point. I have like a very specific kind of string class where it's just based on a condition, like what it outputs. So it can be useful for things that depend on other stuff. So you don't change a bunch of variables at once. So yeah, essentially it's just like a little condition that's like, are you using this? Have a space, or you could even just include a space at the end of it automatically.
All right, last question here. Would there be unforeseen hitches when changing a main character's height or weight?
Depends on how you're using them in the script, I would say. Like there are some things that I wouldn't necessarily allow the player to change after they've already begun the game. I think like changing pronouns as you go, sure, whatever, you can change your gender. But when it comes to like height or weight, it probably makes more sense to reserve that for specific times in the script if you're going to reference it. But otherwise, honestly, I mean, if the player gets over the fact that at one point they were referred to as short and the next time they were referred to as tall, then it doesn't really matter. That's their experience.
All right. Thank you so much for your talk. If there's any more questions, feel free to ask in the chat. And would you believe it, folks? We're at the last talk of the day. It is almost 6 o'clock p.m. We've been here for 8 hours almost. Jackie, you're all set? Are you unmuted? Let's see here. Let me find you. Oh, you're still muted. There, I clicked the button, didn't I?
Hello?
Yep, I can hear you. It's all
All right,
yours.
awesome. Ready to start.